They were left to die. A torn cardboard box on the edge of a frozen street. Inside, 10 golden retriever puppies, their tiny bodies curled up, barely moving. The snow kept falling. Their breath was fading, one by one, no food, no blanket, just frostbitten fur and silence. A garbage truck was getting closer, and still no one came. Comment, yes, if your heart can't bear the thought of them dying alone. In the small frostbitten town of Oak Ridge, Minnesota, the night moved slowly, dragging its shadowy silence across cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. It was the kind of cold that whispered through the seams of houses, wormed its way through coats, and clung to bone. Street lamps flickered weakly against the weight of a storm that had rolled in the night before and refused to leave. And in that winter, in that stillness, nobody noticed the cardboard box sitting crookedly by the curb of Glendale Avenue. Except for Graham Merton. He was trudging home from his third consecutive graveyard shift at the bottle recycling plant, the muscles in his back aching, hands stuffed into a fraying canvas coat too thin for January. He walked with the sluggish steps of a man who didn't have anywhere to rush to. His beard, dusted white by frost, barely hid the lines etched into his cheeks, the kind of lines not carved by time alone, but by grief and the slow grind of poverty. Graham was 49, but carried the air of someone much older. His boots were cracked at the toes, laces tied together in mismatched knots. He wore the same gray beanie he had since the year his son died. The streets were deserted, not out of fear, but because people had the sense to stay warm inside, something Graham's house no longer offered. He had gotten the disconnection notice a week ago, 2 months of unpaid power bills. The heat had been cut last Friday. A single kerosene lamp now lit the kitchen. The rest of the house was a mosaic of shadows and cold silence. He didn't expect to find anything different in the night. He just wanted to get home, peel off the sweat-soaked thermal undershirt, maybe boil a can of beans if the gas line hadn't frozen. But then he saw it. At first, it looked like trash. A soggy, sagging cardboard box shoved beside a leaning stop sign. The snow had almost swallowed it. Only the warped edge stuck out. He would have kept walking, but something in the air shifted. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration, a flicker of movement just inside his peripheral vision. He stopped, turned, took 2 steps back, crouched. The box was damp to the touch, brittle and reeking of old newspaper. He peeled it open slowly and stared. 10 tiny puppies, curled against each other like tangled socks. Their fur was matted and stiff with frost. Golden retrievers, maybe 4 weeks old at most. One lifted its head feebly, opened glazed eyes for half a second, and collapsed back into the heap. Another was breathing in short, stuttering gasps. They weren't whimpering. They weren't moving much at all, because it was too cold to cry. Graham's breath caught in his throat. He looked down the street, nothing but the shimmer of ice and the distant moan of wind. No tire tracks, no footprints. Whoever left them had done so in silence and shame. And now, a garbage truck was turning the corner at the end of the block, its headlights bouncing across snowbanks like blind eyes. Panic, sudden and irrational, surged through him. He scooped the entire box into his arms, the bottom bent inward, threatening to split. He pressed it close to his chest and began walking faster, boots slipping on the ice. The wind clawed at his face, but he barely noticed. His heart was hammering. His house, 4 doors down, looked darker than usual. A single candle flickered behind the kitchen window. He reached the porch and kicked the door with his boot until it creaked open. Inside, the air was barely warmer than outside. He shut the door with his shoulder, stepped over a laundry basket, and knelt on the living room floor. He laid the box down carefully, one side collapsing inward. The puppies barely stirred. The room was bare. No couch, no TV, just a sleeping bag on the floor, and a pile of worn paperbacks in the corner. The carpet was threadbare, stained with time and boot grease. The air carried a faint smell of damp wood and burnt metal, left over from when he had tried, unsuccessfully, to repair the space heater. He turned on the flashlight taped to the wall. Its weak beam trembled over the fur. One of the puppies made a soft sound, like air leaking from a balloon. Graham touched its side with 2 fingers. It shivered, almost imperceptibly. He pulled the old army coat from the hook near the door and laid it over the box. Then he grabbed the last clean towel from a milk crate and wrapped the smallest pup like a burrito. In the dim light, they all looked the same, little lumps of gold, barely alive. And Graham had nothing to give them. No electricity, no space heater, no puppy food, not even a warm floor. Just his breath, his body, his time. He sat cross-legged beside the box, holding the wrapped puppy to his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just listened. To the wind outside, to the faintest heartbeat against his own. Somewhere behind his ribs, a door cracked open. Years ago, there had been a boy in this house, Elijah, 6 years old when the heart murmur turned into something worse. The hospital bills had drained every savings account, every favor, and in the end, the boy died anyway, quietly, while Graham was parking the car outside. He hadn't made it in time. Since then, this house had been a shell. Since then, Graham had learned how to live with silence. But tonight, silence meant death, and he couldn't let that happen again. He looked down at the tiny face buried in the towel. Frost clung to its whiskers. Its nose was dry, cracked. Its little ears barely twitched. He could feel the weight of the box beside him. Too light. Far too light for 10 healthy pups. He knew the math didn't work. He didn't have money. He was already behind on rent, behind on food, behind on hope. But he had arms. He had heat. And for tonight, maybe that was enough. By the third morning, the temperature had risen only slightly, but it felt like spring inside Graham's chest. Scout had survived the night. She was still weak, trembling with every breath, but there was color in her gums again, a slight flicker in her eyes when he moved. That flicker, so small, so human, had been enough to keep Graham awake with gratitude. He hadn't thanked anything in years, but that morning he muttered something that might have been a prayer. The rest of the pups had started yipping, hungry and clumsy as they tumbled over each other. Graham had long since run out of broth, rice, or anything remotely soft. The crackers were gone. The last can of stew sat unopened on the counter, but he couldn't bring himself to use it. It felt like breaking the only rule he had left about dignity. So, he layered on 2 shirts, wrapped his scarf twice around his neck, and decided to make the walk to the flea market. The Oak Ridge Outdoor Flea Market, held in the south lot of a closed-down strip mall, was more scavenger camp than storefront. Plastic tarps flapped over tables of rusted tools, expired canned goods, and wool socks with mismatched toes. The meat stand at the far end was run by Hank Draper, a short, wide-shouldered man with a nose like a busted walnut and a permanent red hue on his cheeks. He had a reputation for being tight-fisted, and he liked people to know it. Graham approached, waiting his turn behind a man bartering for liver scraps. When he stepped forward, Hank didn't greet him. "I was wondering," Graham said, keeping his voice low, "if you had any leftovers, bones or trimmings. Nothing fresh. Just whatever you were going to toss." Hank looked him up and down. "Didn't I see you in here last month?" Graham nodded once. "Well, it ain't a soup kitchen," Hank said. "You want something, you pay." "I don't have money," Graham admitted, "but I could work. Move some crates, help clean up after—" "Don't need help." Hank spat into the slush beside him. "Now move on. You're scaring customers." Graham didn't argue. He'd been turned away before. Still, the sting settled in his chest like a dull ache. He turned, pulling his coat tighter, and began walking away. He hadn't gone far when a voice whispered behind him, "Mister! Hey, mister! Wait!" He turned. A boy, maybe 12, stood behind a vendor table draped in old comic books and used toys. The boy had dark brown skin, shaggy hair peeking from under a knit cap, and the thinness of someone who had grown up used to skipping meals. His name was Noel. Noel Santiago lived 3 houses down from Graham. His mother, Maribel, worked part-time at the supermarket. Graham had seen the boy a few times, riding a dented red bike, kicking a half-deflated soccer ball in the alley, or walking home with his hoodie up and earbuds in. They'd never spoken. Now the boy extended a small grocery bag toward him. Inside, 2 ends of bread, a handful of broken crackers, and 2 slightly bent hot dogs wrapped in foil. "It's not much," Noel mumbled, "but you can use it, right?" Graham stared. "Where did you get this?" "My mom brings home stuff from the break room," he said. "I saved it. They were going to throw it out." Graham reached for his wallet, then remembered it was empty. "I can't take this for free." Noel shrugged. "You helped those puppies. I saw 'em. They're cute. One barked like a squeaky toy. Graham felt something stir in his throat. Thank you. Noel grinned, toothy and a little crooked. You remind me of my dad. If he was still around, only I think you're nicer. Graham couldn't respond. He just nodded and turned away, clutching the bag like something sacred. He made it back home just as the clouds darkened overhead. The wind had picked up again, dragging the scent of firewood and far-off traffic down the narrow streets. Inside, the pups swarmed him as best they could, half walking, half crawling. He tore the bread into small pieces, soaked it in warm water, and sliced the hot dogs into little medallions. He fed each pup slowly, murmuring their names, even though they couldn't understand, all except Scout. She wasn't strong enough to chew, so he mashed a piece into a paste and gently wiped it against her tongue. She blinked, weakly but with purpose. Afterward, Graham sank onto the floor beside them, his back against the peeling drywall. He stared at the ceiling, which had a new crack above the light fixture. He didn't feel the hunger in his belly anymore, only the weight of quiet hope. As the pups dozed off in a pile of twitching legs and tiny snores, Graham noticed something strange through the window. A man, parked across the street, leaning against the side of a black sedan with tinted windows, tall, with a wool coat and a cap pulled low, hands in his pockets. He didn't move, didn't look around, just stared. Graham stood slowly and stepped closer to the window. The man didn't flinch. After a moment, he climbed back into the car and drove off. Graham's stomach tightened. That car hadn't been on their street before. In a neighborhood like Oak Ridge, you knew every car. And something about the man's posture didn't feel like a neighbor's concern. He turned from the window, jaw tight, and looked back at the puppies, still sleeping, still innocent. He wasn't sure what that man wanted. But Graham had just found something worth protecting. The storm arrived without warning, as if the sky had simply given up, holding it back. By late afternoon, snow was already thick along the window panes, slapping against the plastic sheeting with icy gusts. Wind roared down the chimney like a wounded animal. The light outside turned blue-gray, and the streets vanished beneath a thick white shroud. Everything seemed to stop breathing, except the cold. Graham had seen winters before, dozens of them. He'd worked through blizzards, slept in rooms where frost formed on the inside of the windows, but nothing felt quite like this. Maybe it was the weight of responsibility. Maybe it was the 10 tiny lives depending on him. Or maybe it was the creeping dread of that black sedan from the day before. The electricity had been gone for over a week now. The cold inside the house was almost indistinguishable from outside. He had used up every candle, every dry towel, and every blanket except one. Elijah's old astronaut throw, now wrapped tightly around Scout, who still hadn't fully recovered. Her eyes fluttered open now and then, but she still barely moved. Graham had started burning anything that could catch fire. First, the stack of magazines under the coffee table, then the legs of an old stool, its screws clinking to the floor as he split it apart with a hammer. That morning, he had torn pages from a worn-out phone book and tossed them into a metal pot with rubbing alcohol, hoping for just a little more flame. But it wasn't enough. The roof had begun to leak near the back of the house. Water had dripped steadily onto the floor, leaving a dark spot that widened with each passing hour. The leak soaked through a cardboard box where he had kept his son's last birthday cards. He stared at them as the ink bled and curled, as if the paper couldn't bear to remember anymore. The puppies whimpered and shuffled, too young to understand what was happening, too fragile to fight it. Their fur had grown a little thicker, and they could now walk awkwardly, their paws slipping on the linoleum. Graham kept them huddled near the oven, where he had stacked a small barricade of books and table legs to feed the flames. But the warmth barely held. One of the pups, he'd named her Junie, the one with a white stripe on her nose and the softest ears, had grown quieter since morning. She hadn't eaten much. Her breaths came shallow, more like whispers than life. Graham held her for over an hour that night, wrapped in a kitchen rag, whispering to her over the faint crackling of fire. He tried rubbing her chest, stroking her paws, anything to stir her awake. Her body was so light in his arms. He remembered carrying Elijah home after his first surgery, how he had weighed just about the same. But Junie didn't wake up. She gave one last exhale, soft and warm against his thumb. And then, nothing. Graham didn't move. Not for a long time. He sat there on the floor with the other puppies nestled around him and cried. Not the kind of crying that filled rooms, the quiet kind, the kind that rusted the soul. Tears slid silently down his cheeks, disappearing into his beard. He hadn't cried like this in 20 years. Not since Elijah. Not since the funeral, where he couldn't look his ex-wife in the eye because he didn't have answers to anything anymore. The sound of knocking pulled him back. 3 sharp raps on the front door, barely audible above the wind. He opened it to find Lucinda Carraway, standing with a pink crocheted scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck, her cheeks red with cold. In her gloved hands, she carried a large silver thermos and a rolled-up extension cord tangled around something. "I saw the smoke," she said simply. "Didn't look like chimney smoke." Graham opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Lucinda stepped inside uninvited. She had a sturdy gait, a determined stare. Her dark green coat was buttoned all the way to the chin, and a brooch shaped like a cardinal glinted from her lapel. She looked around the dim room, spotted the pups, and softened just a little. "I used to raise beagles with my husband," she said, kneeling carefully, "before the heart attack took him. Never thought I'd miss those muddy paw prints, but there it is." She plugged the cord into a car battery-powered inverter she had pulled behind her in a plastic sled. Then she unfolded a worn electric heating blanket and laid it across the oven-side floor like she had done it 100 times before. The pups, sensing warmth, wobbled toward it instinctively. Graham stared, not knowing what to say. "I also brought hot water," she added, nodding to the thermos. "You can soak towels or warm their bellies." "Thank you," he finally said, his voice low. Lucinda glanced at the little bundle in his lap. "She didn't make it?" He shook his head. She nodded, lips pursed, and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Not for long, but enough to say she understood something he hadn't said aloud. For the next hour, they sat in silence. Graham tended to the remaining puppies while Lucinda mended a tear in her glove. The storm howled louder, but inside the house, a small island of warmth had returned. Before leaving, Lucinda turned at the door. "If you need anything else, blankets, soup, a phone call, I'm just across the street." Graham nodded. "I might take you up on that." She smirked. "I hope you do, for their sake." When she was gone, Graham looked down at the heating blanket now gently glowing beneath the puppies. Scout was curled up beside Benny, her breathing more stable now. Gus was snoring faintly, belly rising and falling like a heartbeat. Even Milo, the clumsy one, was nestled into the corner, his paw resting across Junie's empty spot. Outside, the storm screamed on, but inside, 10 had become 9. The loss was sharp, unfair, and final. Yet for the first time in years, Graham didn't feel entirely alone. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a silence that felt almost reverent. Snow coated the streets like a final breath held too long. Ice sparkled on the rooftops and telephone wires, beautiful and deadly. Inside the small house on Glendale Avenue, Graham sat on the floor, a mug of warm water in his hands, watching the puppies stir beneath the now lifeless heating blanket. Lucinda's car battery had given out hours earlier, but it had done its job. Scout was still breathing, and the rest of the pups were curled into one another like a living quilt. The spot where Junie had slept remained empty. Graham hadn't moved the small cloth he had wrapped her in. He wasn't ready. Maybe he wouldn't be for a while. Around 8 a.m., a gentle knock echoed from the front door. Not the sharp, demanding kind of the mailman or the unsettling rhythm of a stranger, but soft, unsure. Graham opened it slowly. Standing there, cheeks red from the cold and a press badge clipped to her jacket, was Emily Rhodes, a young local reporter from Channel 7. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with curly auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail and wide, curious eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. Her coat was 2 sizes too big, cinched at the waist with a scarf, and she carried a camera slung over one shoulder like a second limb. "Mr. Merton?" she asked, polite but purposeful. "Emily Rhodes, local news. May I have a moment?" Graham hesitated. He didn't like cameras. He didn't like attention. But Emily's expression wasn't one of ambition. It was concern. Something soft but insistent. "I heard from a vendor at the flea market," she continued, "about what you did, rescuing the puppies. In this cold. They said, you didn't even have power." Graham gave a slow nod but said nothing. Emily shifted slightly on her feet. "I'd just like to ask a few questions. Maybe take a few shots. We run a community segment on good people doing good things. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. After a moment of silence, Graham stepped back and opened the door wider. Inside, Emily's expression softened the moment she saw the pups. They were awake now, yawning and stretching clumsily. Benny had found a spot in a bowl meant for Graham's oatmeal and was refusing to come out. Scout, weaker but alert, raised her head at the sound of Emily's voice. "You really saved them," Emily said quietly, almost to herself. Graham knelt, adjusting one of the blankets. They weren't loud enough to be found. That's the worst part. They didn't even cry. Emily pulled out a notepad. "Do you mind if I ask how you found them?" "They were in a box," he replied, beside a stop sign. Looked like trash. He told her the story, sparing few details. The ice, the cold, the moment he thought Scout wouldn't make it. He spoke with the caution of someone unused to being heard, but too tired to hide it anymore. As Emily knelt to photograph the puppies, her brow furrowed. She leaned closer to Gus and Milo, brushing back the fur behind their ears. She examined one more carefully, then another. "Did you notice," she asked slowly, "that some of them have markings behind the ear? Tiny scars? Almost like someone cut them?" Graham finished, voice sharp. Emily nodded. "It's not uncommon in underground breeding rings. Sometimes they tag or mark litters like inventory, especially if the pups are from a high-demand breed, like Goldens." Graham felt his chest tighten. So they weren't just abandoned. They were dumped, hidden. Emily sat back on her heels. It could mean someone's trying to cover their tracks. If they were part of a larger operation and something went wrong, heat from authorities, disease outbreak, they might have gotten rid of the weak or unsellable ones. "But they're just babies," Graham whispered. Emily nodded grimly. "And that's what scares me." She didn't ask more questions that day. Instead, she packed up slowly, giving Graham her card. "The segment will air tomorrow night," she said, "but I'll edit it gently. You don't come off as someone who wants the spotlight." "I just don't want them taken away," he replied. "They're safe here. They've got each other now." That afternoon, Graham received 5 phone calls, all from unfamiliar numbers. 2 were local rescue organizations offering to help. Food, bedding, temporary fosters. One was a woman who offered to adopt 3 puppies together as a gift for her niece. Another was a vet tech who asked about Scout and offered to come by with some antibiotics if needed. Graham didn't answer any of them. He felt the world creeping in again. Kindness, yes, but also eyes. Questions, decisions. Lucinda came by around dusk with a pot of vegetable soup and a stack of folded towels. She didn't speak much, just refilled the pup's water dish and handed Graham a plastic bag full of tea lights. As night fell, Graham stepped outside onto the porch. Snow had begun to melt, leaving puddles that glimmered under the streetlight. The same streetlight where he had first found the box. It looked so harmless now, so ordinary. But something had changed. Behind him, the puppies yipped and scrambled. Scout gave a faint bark, barely louder than a sigh. Inside those walls, life was beginning again. And somewhere out there, in shadows he couldn't yet name, someone had tried to erase that life. But they had failed. The news segment aired on a Wednesday night. It was short, barely 4 minutes, but powerful. Emily had edited it with care, choosing footage that highlighted the gentleness of Graham's hands, the vulnerability in the puppy's eyes, and the dim warmth of the house that had become their shelter. She didn't show the broken windows, the scorch marks where furniture had been burned for heat, or the empty shelves in the kitchen. But she didn't need to. The story told itself. By the next morning, Graham's porch was covered in bags of donated dog food, folded blankets, and envelopes with handwritten notes. Some included small bills. One note simply said, "You reminded me what kindness looks like." Graham didn't know how to feel. Grateful, yes, but also exposed. That same morning he noticed something odd. A white pickup truck parked down the street, facing his house. Engine running. The driver, male, mid-40s, square jaw, wearing a cap low over his eyes, sat motionless behind the wheel. Graham stared from behind the curtain. The man never got out. After 30 minutes, the truck rolled away. The next day, it returned. Different spot, same man. And then came the note, folded inside his mailbox, no stamp, no name, just one line, written in jagged pen, "Mind your own business, or you'll lose more than a mutt." Graham read it 3 times before crumpling it in his fist. The weight in his chest returned, something colder than fear, sharper than anger. He called Emily first. She arrived in less than 20 minutes, wrapped in her overcoat, hair pinned in a messy twist. She listened quietly as Graham unfolded everything. The truck, the man, the note. Then she nodded and called the police. The officer who arrived was Deputy Kyle Renshaw, a clean-cut, broad-shouldered man in his 30s with sandy hair and a permanent furrow between his brows. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, as Emily explained the situation. "I understand your concern," he said eventually, "but unless there's evidence of trespassing or a direct threat to life, there's not much we can do. A note's just a note." Graham handed him the crumpled paper. Renshaw barely glanced at it before slipping it into his pocket. "I'll file a report, but if this is about some online drama from the story, it'll blow over." Emily's jaw tightened. "It's not online drama. There's something bigger here. I've been looking into it." Renshaw raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That night, the truck didn't return. But Graham didn't sleep. He sat up beside the basket of puppies, flashlight in one hand, a rusted crowbar in the other. The flames in the oven flickered, casting warped shadows across the walls. The next morning, Lucinda came over with a casserole dish and a strange offer. "My basement's half finished," she said. "Used to be my husband's woodworking space. It's warmer, safer. You and the pups can stay there, at least until we figure this mess out." Graham looked at her, surprised. "I can't ask you—" "You didn't," she interrupted. "I'm offering. Don't let pride freeze you out of common sense." By that afternoon, Graham had packed his few belongings, mostly old sweaters, a photo of Elijah, and a pile of towels, and carried the pups across the yard, one by one. Lucinda's basement smelled faintly of cedar and old varnish. She had cleared a corner near the furnace, laid out a rug, and even plugged in a small portable heater. The dogs explored quickly. Scout tried to clamber onto a wooden stool and failed, then barked once in triumph anyway. It made Graham smile for the first time in days. While the pups settled in, Emily knocked on the door again, this time with news. "I found something," she said, pulling out a folder. "There was a facility. Used to be a breeding kennel just outside Duluth. Shut down 3 years ago after multiple violations. Animal neglect, unauthorized sales. The owners disappeared before court proceedings. But someone reported seeing trucks behind the property last month. Big ones. No logos." She flipped open the folder, revealing printed photos, overhead satellite shots, a partial license plate number, and a blurry image of what looked like a loading crate. "I think the puppies came from there. The ear cuts, the age, the timing. It lines up." Graham felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Why dump them in town? Maybe the truck broke down. Maybe the buyer backed out. Or maybe, she paused, they thought if they left them in the cold, nobody would notice. Graham looked away. "They didn't count on someone like you," Emily said quietly. As she turned to leave, she added, "But be careful. If they think those puppies are evidence, they won't stop at a warning note." That night, Graham sat on a fold-out chair in Lucinda's basement, surrounded by the pups, watching their tiny bellies rise and fall with sleep. He had nothing but a crowbar, a flashlight, and a growing sense that whatever storm had passed wasn't the last. But now he wasn't alone. The wind had died down, but the cold had not. In the dim orange glow of Lucinda's basement, the air was thick with quiet tension. Graham sat on the floor next to a space heater Lucinda had borrowed from her niece. Around him, the puppies slept in their usual pile, breathing evenly, warm and fed. Scout now walked without wobbling. Milo had discovered the thrill of chasing his own tail, and did it often, crashing into bowls and blankets. The others nipped playfully, no longer fragile bundles, but dogs in the making. But Graham couldn't sleep. Something about the note, the truck, and Emily's findings had carved unease into his bones. It wasn't just that the puppies had been dumped. Someone owned them once, someone who had seen them as inventory, not lives. And people like that didn't let things go quietly. That night, he kept the basement lights low. He unplugged the heater an hour before midnight to conserve power and sat listening to the stillness outside. Lucinda had installed a security latch on the storm door and given Graham a baseball bat that once belonged to her late husband. "Don't swing it like you're playing," she'd said. "Swing it like you're ending something." It was 2:37 a.m. when Graham heard the first sound, A click. Not from inside, from the small storm access door at the back of the basement. It was old, rusted, rarely used, but now it creaked slightly, like someone had tested it. Then, footsteps. Soft, but too heavy to be rats. Shadows blocked the faint light filtering through the snow-dusted glass. Graham stood, slowly, heart thudding. He moved toward the door, silently, bat in one hand, flashlight in the other. Behind him, the puppies stirred. One of them, Benny, let out a low, uncertain growl. Then a crash. The door slammed open, and a figure in a black hoodie lunged inside. Graham swung. The bat cracked against the wall as the figure dodged and shouted, "Get the dogs!" Another man appeared behind him, shorter, heavier, wearing a dark ski mask and gloves. "Quick! Get the damn box!" Graham yelled, instinct rising from some buried place inside him. He didn't feel the bat connect, but he heard the grunt and the sound of someone stumbling into the metal utility shelf. Cans clattered to the floor. Upstairs, lights flicked on. Lucinda, in a bathrobe and slippers, stormed down the wooden steps with a hand-crank flashlight and a garden rake. "I called the cops!" she shouted, voice sharper than her age implied. "You so much as touch those dogs and I'll break your teeth in alphabetical order." One of the intruders panicked and turned for the exit, but too late. A low snarl cut through the air. Milo, no longer a wobbling puppy, but a fast, sleek blur of gold, leapt forward with surprising force and clamped his jaws down on the man's gloved wrist. The man screamed. The other tried to drag him free, but Graham tackled him from behind, slamming both to the ground. Footsteps thundered from the front porch. Noel burst in through the unlocked main door, carrying a camera phone. "Emily's live!" he cried. "She's streaming everything!" Sure enough, behind him, Emily Rhodes pushed in with her phone in one hand and a pepper spray canister in the other. Her face was pale but focused. "I saw them pull up," she panted. "Started the stream the moment I saw them near the side gate. You're live right now. Everyone's watching." The intruders froze. Moments later, sirens howled down Glendale Avenue. Deputy Kyle Renshaw arrived with two other officers. The men were cuffed and dragged outside. Milo was still growling, fur bristling, tail stiff. Renshaw crouched beside Graham. "You okay?" Graham nodded. His arms were shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. Emily handed her phone to an officer. "Everything's recorded. Faces, voices, the plate number on the pickup. It's all there." The man Milo had bitten was bleeding through his glove. Renshaw glanced at the wound, then down at the scar behind the man's ear. "Well," the deputy muttered, "looks like these guys were more than just thieves." By sunrise, the video had gone viral. Emily's stream had been picked up by 3 local networks and shared thousands of times online. "Elderly man defends puppies from black market dog smugglers," the headlines read. One called Graham the Quiet Guardian. Another dubbed him the man with the golden heart and golden dogs. Lucinda's house became a beacon. Rescue groups arrived with donations. A mobile vet set up a temporary clinic in a neighbor's garage to check the puppies. Milo, who had bitten the attacker, was declared healthy, brave, and slightly overconfident. But Graham stayed inside. The fame felt foreign. He wasn't a hero. He was just tired. He was a man who had once been broken by grief and somehow, through the silent loyalty of 10 abandoned lives, had found something to stand for again. Noel brought him a cup of hot cocoa that evening. Graham sat with the boy and the puppies in the warmth of Lucinda's basement, wrapped in donated blankets. "I'm glad you didn't give up," Noel said simply. Graham looked at him, then down at Milo curled in his lap. "I almost did," he replied. But then one of them barked, and the silence was gone. Spring came slowly to Glendale Avenue. It did not announce itself with blooming flowers or chirping birds, but with the steady melt of snow and the way sunlight finally began to stick to the sides of buildings again. The icicles outside Lucinda's house dripped like clockwork, and for the first time in weeks, the air no longer cut like glass. Inside the cozy basement that had become a sanctuary, Graham sat on a donated recliner, his feet propped up on a crate of kibble. The puppies, now 7 weeks old, no longer fit in a single pile. They had sprawled across the basement like an untamed golden tide. Scout sleeping belly up beside the heater, Benny chewing on the leg of a broken table, Milo barking at his reflection in a tipped-over baking pan. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Since the attempted theft and Emily's viral live stream, everything had changed. Donations had poured in. Not just food and money, but services. A local contractor named Patrick Dell, broad-shouldered with a crooked nose and hands thick with calluses, showed up one morning and said simply, "We're fixing your house, no charge." Patrick had grown up in the same neighborhood, lost his own dog to illness the year before, and said Graham's story stuck something back together in me. So fix it he did. The roof was repaired, new windows installed, the walls insulated. Someone even repainted the door in bright cornflower blue, a color Lucinda insisted would make the neighbors less likely to frown. Through it all, Graham felt overwhelmed, not by the noise or the help or even the attention, but by something deeper, the permission to be cared for. It had been so long. The city issued him a special permit to keep all 10 dogs after a brief evaluation. The officer who came by, Janice Wilmer, a calm, middle-aged woman with thick glasses and a clipboard, was charmed within moments. "These dogs are safer here than half the kennels I've inspected," she said, kneeling to let Gus lick her hand. "And this little one," she nodded toward Scout, who was curled in Graham's flannel shirt. "She's the happiest underweight pup I've ever seen." The moment the paperwork was signed, Graham felt something in him relax, like the last bit of frost melting from an old window. Emily's long-form article was published in the Atlantic Weekly. It was titled, "The Man Who Stayed When No One Else Did." She had written it with tenderness and depth, exploring not just the act of rescue, but the soul behind it. She didn't shy away from Graham's past, his lost son, the years of loneliness, but treated it as part of the story's truth. The article received national attention. News vans came and went. Letters from strangers arrived in bundles. Some told him he was a hero. Some simply said, "Thank you for not looking away." Lucinda had, somewhat unofficially, become the grandmother of the house. She dropped by each morning with biscuits for both man and dog, helped fold laundry, and insisted on naming the runt of the litter Harold, after her late husband. She didn't ask for anything in return, except that Graham allow her to paint tiny flowers on the dog bowls. And he did. One afternoon, while Graham was sorting mail with Noel, who had started coming over after school each day, he found a plain envelope tucked between a magazine and a utility bill. There was no return address. The handwriting was jagged, unsure. Inside was a short letter. "You don't know me, but my son was part of the group that left those dogs. He was being used, paid to help, but too scared to say no. He's in juvenile now, but he's learning. Watching what you did, it made him cry. He told me he wants to do better, and I just wanted to say, thank you for saving what he couldn't, and maybe in a way saving him too." Graham read the letter twice, then a third time. He didn't say anything, but he quietly folded it, placed it inside a small wooden box beside Elijah's photo, and sat down on the floor among the dogs. They surrounded him, licking his hands, tugging at his sleeves, one climbing directly into his lap without invitation. Noel, watching from the corner, grinned. "You ever gonna name this place?" Graham looked around at the remodeled house, the warm lighting, the trail of paw prints across the new linoleum. He thought of the freezing street where the box had first been left, of Scout's shallow breaths, of Junie's tiny body in his hands, of Milo's growl, of Lucinda's rake, of Emily's courage. And then he smiled. "Family house," he said quietly. Noel blinked. "That's kind of simple." "It is," Graham replied, "but that's what it is now." That night, the porch light of 214 Glendale Avenue glowed like a beacon against the melting snow. A man sat inside, surrounded by golden fur, gentle noise, and soft, patient hope. He had no riches, no pedigree, no future he had planned, but he had warmth and love and the second chance he never knew he'd needed, and 10 names to call family. Sometimes the smallest lives are the ones most easily discarded. 10 helpless puppies left in the freezing cold, no one to cry for them, no one to wait for them. But then came one man, not wealthy, not famous, just a man with a broken past and a heart still willing to care. And through him, we saw it. God's quiet miracle, not in thunder or fire, but in warmth rekindled on a kitchen floor, in a puppy's breath against a grieving chest, in community rising where silence once lived. This story is more than about rescue. It is about redemption, about how love, when chosen in the hardest of winters, becomes a fire the world cannot ignore. And maybe, just maybe, that fire was lit by the hand of something higher. So, if you believe miracles can come through ordinary people, if you believe that compassion still wins, if you believe that God watches even the smallest of his creatures, comment Amen to honor the forgotten, the rescued, and those who never gave up. Share this story to remind others that kindness still changes everything. Subscribe to follow more true stories where love rewrites the ending. May God bless every heart that paused to listen. What if one gentle paw could do what months of therapy never could? In a quiet coastal town, a 7-month-old baby lay still, paralyzed and silent, until a rescued golden retriever named Sunny entered her life. What happened next stunned doctors and gave hope to families around the world. Do you believe that a dog could be heaven's answer to a mother's prayer? Even if you haven't seen the full story yet, comment I do if you believe every sick child deserves a second chance and every loyal dog deserves a purpose. Autumn had crept quietly into the seaside town of Blue Haven, Oregon. The wind was damp with salt and memory, rustling through the narrow lanes like a ghost searching for its name. The sky that morning was a pale sheet of pearl gray, and the scent of rain hung thick over the slanted roofs and leaning mailboxes. The waves crashed gently along the shore beyond the cliffside road, rhythmic and low, like a breath half held. Willow Crescent Lane curved like a question mark near the edge of the cliffs, and at the far end stood a modest, pale blue bungalow with white trim and ivy crawling lazily across its southern wall. A wooden sign still hung crooked over the porch, painted with a fading "Welcome." The Quinn family had only just moved in 2 weeks ago, and the word still felt unfamiliar, like trying on someone else's coat. Natalie Quinn stood in the kitchen, both hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug she hadn't yet unpacked from a moving box. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where gray clouds met gray sea, an unbroken horizon of quiet. She was 36, tall and lean, though lately her frame seemed bonier, clothes looser, as if she were slowly disappearing beneath the weight of something unseen. Her auburn hair was twisted into a bun that had collapsed sometime during the night, and shadows bloomed beneath her eyes. Once, she had been a traveling photographer, one who chased lightning storms and sunrises, one who laughed easily and often. That version of her had vanished on the day her daughter, Harper, was born. Harper Quinn, just 7 months old, had entered the world without a cry. Complications during labor left her with severe nerve damage. Doctors called it global hypotonia. Natalie had memorized the term, repeated it until the syllables lost meaning. It meant Harper could not move. Not her arms, not her legs, not her neck. She lay still in her special adaptive recliner like a doll carved from porcelain, her large green eyes the only thing that moved, and they watched everything. Ryan Quinn, Natalie's husband, came in from the garage, his boots leaving streaks of wet sawdust on the tile. He was 41, with shoulders that had once carried timber and laughter, now hunched more often in silence. A carpenter and boat repairman, Ryan had picked up shifts at the local dock to pay for Harper's therapy equipment. His blonde hair had thinned in recent years, and his jaw was usually dusted with a beard he never quite had time to shave. He said little that morning, just placed a plate of toast on the table and kissed the top of Natalie's head. "Harper's still sleeping," she murmured. "She twitched a finger yesterday," Ryan offered gently. "It was probably a spasm," Natalie replied, her voice flat. He didn't argue. Neither of them had the strength to hold on to false hope. A knock interrupted their silence. Natalie opened the door to find a figure bundled in wool and warmth. Marla Green, their next-door neighbor, stood there with a wicker basket and a crooked smile. She was in her early 70s, with silver-gray hair pulled back in a low twist, and a weather-worn face that looked like it had seen many winters, but still chose kindness each time. Her gait was uneven, remnants of an old injury, but her eyes were bright with intent. "Morning, Natalie," Marla said, shifting the basket to one hip. "Brought over some of my blackberry jam, fresh batch." Natalie gave a tired smile and stepped aside to let her in. "You didn't have to." "I know, I wanted to." Inside, the Quinn's home still bore the scattered chaos of recent arrival. Half-unpacked boxes, rolled-up rugs, picture frames without nails. Marla placed the basket on the counter and glanced toward the living room, where Harper lay in her recliner, just beginning to stir. "She's a quiet one," Marla said softly. She doesn't have a choice, Natalie replied, and instantly regretted the sharpness in her tone. Marla didn't flinch. She's watching, though. Don't mistake silence for absence. Natalie sighed, leaning back against the sink. It's been 7 months, Marla. She doesn't laugh. She doesn't cry. She just exists. I don't know how to be her mother anymore. Marla turned to face her fully, voice low but steady. I used to work in animal-assisted therapy, with kids like Harper. Sometimes, when nothing else worked, the right dog did. Natalie blinked. A dog? There's a pup I know, a golden retriever. 4 months old, gentle, patient. He was rescued from a shelter near the edge of Salem. Something tells me he's meant for someone who needs quiet company. Would you consider meeting him? Natalie looked toward the living room, where Harper now lay wide awake, her eyes tracking the spinning ceiling fan. I don't know. We have so much going on already. I don't think we can take on a puppy. You wouldn't be taking him on. You'd be letting him in. Natalie didn't answer. Marla patted her arm before she left. Think about it. His name's Sonny. That night, the wind rolled over Blue Haven like a restless child, rattling loose shutters and setting the chimes on porches into uneasy song. Natalie sat by Harper's side, a book open but unread in her lap. Harper's eyes, as always, stared upward, but her fingers twitched, barely, just once, as if chasing something only she could see. In that moment, Natalie whispered aloud, "Maybe we'll meet him, just to see." The next morning in Blue Haven arrived draped in silver fog, the sea hidden behind thick curtains of mist that rolled inland and clung to the eaves of every home. Natalie Quinn stood at the sink, rinsing a bottle under warm water, her thoughts somewhere far off, though her body moved automatically. Harper had barely slept through the night, and Natalie's body now functioned more from habit than energy. Across the room, Ryan adjusted a loose wheel on Harper's recliner, tools scattered on the floor. It was one of the rare Saturdays he didn't have to work, and he had promised to spend it helping Natalie around the house. But both of them knew they were really just waiting for noon. At exactly 12, a light knock sounded at the door. When Natalie opened it, Marla Green stood there again. Same straw hat, same weathered coat. But this time, she wasn't alone. At her feet, sitting calmly on the welcome mat, was a golden-furred puppy with a deep chest and soft, soulful eyes the color of wet amber. His name was Sonny. Just 4 months old, he had that slightly oversized paw look of young dogs, his body not quite grown into itself yet. His fur was thick and cream-colored, curling just slightly behind his ears. There was a gentleness to his presence, a quiet that mirrored the hush of Harper's world. "He's calm today," Marla said, stepping inside. "He always is around children." Ryan rose from the floor, wiping his hands on his jeans, and studied the dog. "He looks different than I expected." Marla smiled. "He listens more than he barks. Rescued from a kennel that was shutting down. The staff said he never joined the others when they barked. He just watched, chose his moments." Natalie knelt slowly. Sonny's eyes followed her with curiosity, but he didn't move until she extended her fingers. Then he padded forward and gently pressed his nose to her palm. "Do you want him to meet Harper?" Natalie asked. "Let's see what he does," Marla replied. Inside the living room, Harper lay in her recliner, her body still but her eyes already tracking the movement as Sonny entered the room. There was a pause, the kind that stretches across more than just seconds. Then, Sonny walked across the hardwood floor without hesitation, pausing just at Harper's side. He didn't sniff or bark or wag with excitement. He sat down slowly, his tail resting against the floor, and tilted his head. Then, with a kind of unspoken permission, he leaned forward and pressed his nose gently to Harper's tiny, unmoving hand. A sound broke the silence. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a laugh. It was a soft coo, like a breath released. Natalie's hand shot to her mouth. Ryan froze where he stood. Harper's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something else. Something like interest, recognition. "She's never done that," Natalie whispered. "She's aware," Marla said, her voice barely louder than the ticking clock on the mantel. "And now she's seen something worth responding to." Sonny lay down beside the recliner, his body curled protectively near Harper's. Natalie reached for her phone and, without thinking, began recording. It was instinct now. Document every small thing, no matter how small, because with Harper, Even the tiniest moment was monumental. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, the fog thinning outside, while inside the Quinn home, something invisible shifted. Natalie sat with Harper during her afternoon therapy routine, gentle stretching and limb movement as prescribed by Dr. Isaacs, their pediatric neurologist. Usually these sessions were frustrating. Harper rarely responded, and Natalie often ended them with tears she saved for after Ryan had gone back to work. But this time, Sonny stayed. Each time Harper whimpered, a sound barely there, he would lift his head. Each time Natalie shifted Harper's arm, Sonny adjusted his body, resting closer. His breathing seemed to soothe the room. Later that day, another figure arrived at the Quinn's doorstep. Dr. Mira Isaacs, the family's neurologist, had agreed to make a rare house visit after hearing about Sonny. In her early 40s, Mira was compact and sharply intelligent, with curly black hair cropped close and sharp hazel eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with both professionalism and quiet compassion, the result of years working with families whose hopes often clung to inches of improvement. "I've seen dogs make a difference," Mira said as she examined Harper, "but I've never seen a child who responds to nothing respond like this." Sonny lay quietly as Mira worked, his tail thumping only once when Harper's eyes flicked toward him again. Mira scribbled notes into a worn, leather-bound notebook. "I'd like to study them. Carefully. If you're open to it." Natalie nodded. For the first time in months, the word open didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a step forward. That evening, with Harper asleep and the fog fully lifted, Natalie stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the faint shimmer of the sea in the distance. Sonny lay near Harper's crib, paws tucked under his body, ears twitching with every small sound. Ryan joined Natalie, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "She made a sound today," Natalie said. "I heard." "It wasn't nothing, was it?" Ryan shook his head. "It wasn't nothing." Outside, the stars were beginning to emerge one by one over Blue Haven, pale and hesitant behind thin clouds. Inside, for the first time in a long time, there was warmth in the quiet, not just from the heat or the soup warming on the stove, but from the soft weight of a puppy curled near a crib, and the possibility that Harper had found something worth reaching toward. The sun broke through the clouds late that afternoon like a reluctant promise. Golden rays spread across Blue Haven, painting the sidewalks and rooftops in soft, forgiving light. It was the first clear day in over a week, and the scent of drying leaves and seawater mingled in the breeze. In the Quinn house, the light fell diagonally across the living room floor, illuminating the soft fur of Sonny as he lay curled beside Harper's adaptive recliner. Harper was more alert today. Her eyes tracked movement with a sharper focus, especially when Sonny shifted, or when the shadow of a bird passed across the window. Her body, still mostly motionless, held a curious tension, like something inside her was awakening, just beneath the surface. Natalie sat nearby on the carpet, her legs folded beneath her, scribbling notes in the spiral notebook she had started after Dr. Isaac's visit. She had documented the sound Harper made the day Sonny arrived, though it had been faint. Today, she felt something else might come. Sonny stirred and stood up, stretching slowly before padding toward the woven basket of toys that sat under the coffee table. It was a new addition, filled with soft textures and sensory-friendly items Dr. Isaacs had suggested. Sonny nudged through the toys gently until he selected a small, round, plush starfish with a rattle sewn inside. Clutching it in his mouth, he trotted back to Harper's side and dropped it with delicate precision near her right hand. Natalie froze. Sonny didn't bark or paw. Instead, he pressed his nose gently to Harper's hand again, then gave a soft, single whimper, as if inviting her to engage. Harper's fingers remained still, but her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes blinked once, and then it came. A soft sound. Not a word. Not a cry. Just a tiny, trembling syllable like, pushed up from her throat like a bubble reaching the surface. Natalie gasped and dropped her notebook. Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden. She scrambled for her phone and hit record, her hands shaking. Harper looked up at her, then toward Sonny, whose tail thumped gently once against the floor. In that instant, Natalie wasn't just a mother, she was a witness to the smallest miracle she'd ever seen. That evening, Marla Green returned, as she often did now, bringing with her a tin of molasses cookies and a steaming thermos of herbal tea. She stepped inside with the comfort of someone who had long been family, removing her boots by the door. Natalie showed her the video. Marla watched in silence, one hand resting on her chin. "She made a sound?" Natalie whispered again, as though saying it too loudly might make it untrue. "She did," Marla nodded, "and not just because of the toy. That pup knew exactly where to place it." Marla sat beside Natalie and looked toward Sunny, now lying peacefully near Harper once more. "It's time we start documenting all of this formally," she said. "I know someone at a pediatric therapy center in Portland. If they can see this progress, even early on, it might open doors." Natalie hesitated. "What if it's a fluke? What if she doesn't do it again? Then we wait. But we still film, still observe, and we don't let doubt slow us down." The next day, Natalie began creating a video log. She titled it simply, "Harper and Sunny Day 1." Each clip was dated and included time-stamped notes. Sometimes it was just footage of Sunny lying beside Harper, or his nose brushing her hand. Other times, Natalie narrated quietly, explaining what had happened earlier that day. Ryan helped in the evenings, setting up a tripod and reviewing files. They didn't expect anyone else to watch, at least not yet, but creating the log gave Natalie structure, and with it, a sense of forward motion. Meanwhile, word began to spread in their small neighborhood. Lucille Whitaker, a retired music teacher who lived 2 doors down, stopped by with a quilt she'd made for Harper. Lucille was in her early 60s, with a crown of white curls and a voice that still held perfect pitch. She had spent decades leading the elementary school choir, known for her patience and relentless optimism. "She's going to sing someday," Lucille said, her hand resting on Harper's chair. "I can feel it." Marla introduced Natalie to a local librarian named Josie Tran, a Vietnamese-American woman in her 30s with short black hair and a soft-spoken demeanor. Josie had an autistic nephew and a deep interest in developmental therapy. She offered to help Natalie research medical articles and therapy programs, and even suggested a few online communities for parents navigating similar journeys. Natalie felt a rare warmth in those interactions. These women didn't pity her. They showed up. They believed. One afternoon, Josie brought over a tactile book with textured pages. Sunny sniffed it curiously while Natalie gently rubbed the soft fabric edges across Harper's palms. Harper's lips twitched. No sound came, but her gaze didn't drift. It stayed fixed, present. And that was more than enough. Meanwhile, Dr. Isaacs kept in contact, requesting weekly updates and reviewing the footage. She had begun forwarding it to a pediatric neurologist colleague, Dr. Elijah Moreland, who specialized in early neural plasticity. Though they remained cautiously optimistic, both doctors noted something unusual. Harper's reactions with Sunny did not mirror traditional therapy responses. Her attention span increased, her eyes locked with intention, and now she had made a sound. At night, Natalie lay in bed beside Ryan, scrolling through the video logs before sleep. "It's like he knows what she needs," she murmured. "He does," Ryan said. "Sunny's more than just a dog. He's a bridge." Outside, the sea whispered against the cliffs in long, low sighs. The town of Blue Haven lay quiet beneath a pale moon. Inside a small blue house at the end of Willow Crescent Lane, a mother watched her child sleep with a dog curled faithfully at her side and dared to hope again. October drifted into Blue Haven with the quiet grace of falling leaves. The air had turned crisper, the kind that hinted at fireplaces and woolen scarves, and the breeze carried the earthy scent of pine and ocean salt. On Willow Crescent Lane, autumn meant golden light pooling across porches, and children bundling in hoodies as they kicked through the crackling carpet of amber and red. But not all children played in the streets. Across from the Quinn home stood a small yellow house, with dark green shutters and an overgrown garden. From an upstairs window, behind white curtains that swayed slightly in the breeze, a pair of eyes watched the world with quiet intensity. These eyes belonged to Evan Linwood, an 8-year-old boy with neatly trimmed chestnut hair and a perpetually furrowed brow. Evan was small for his age, his frame delicate, his movements careful and precise. He had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at the age of 3, and though he had long since outgrown meltdowns and tantrums, he still preferred silence to sound, patterns to people, and observation to participation. Evan lived with his single mother, Claire Linwood, a woman in her late 30s with tired eyes and a tidy grace. Claire worked remotely as a medical coder, her life an intricate balance of routine and quiet boundaries. She loved her son fiercely and had built a world of consistency for him. Same meals, same routines, same words spoken each day. But even in that structure, Claire worried. Evan rarely spoke. He had only one friend, a puzzle app on his tablet, and she often caught him staring out the window for hours. It was through this window that Evan first saw Sonny. Each day, like clockwork, Evan watched Sonny emerge from the Quinn house, padding alongside Natalie or Ryan as they took him for his short walks around the yard. Evan noticed the way Sonny never barked, how his gait was smooth and unhurried, and how he often turned to glance toward the living room window, as if checking on something unseen. Evan couldn't hear the soft sounds Harper made, but he could see the way Sonny positioned himself beside her recliner. He didn't know the girl's name, but he understood enough. She didn't move, and Sonny stayed close. That, to Evan, made perfect sense. One Saturday morning, Claire stood behind her son as he peered out the window again. "You like that dog, don't you?" she asked. Evan didn't answer. Instead, he lifted one hand and tapped the glass twice, his signal for yes. Claire smiled faintly. "Maybe we'll walk past their house today." That afternoon, bundled in his navy blue jacket, Evan stood just outside their front door, clutching a small rubber ball he had once used in occupational therapy. Claire stood beside him, patiently waiting, not pushing. Eventually, Evan moved. Slowly, cautiously, he crossed the narrow street, something he had never done without holding her hand before. Natalie saw them through the window and opened the door just as Evan reached the gate. Sonny stood behind her, ears perked, tail swaying gently. "Hi, Evan," she said softly, having learned his name from Claire during a recent sidewalk chat. "Would you like to meet Sonny?" Evan didn't speak. He simply looked at Sonny, then held out the ball. Sonny approached without hesitation. He sniffed the ball once, then sat down and offered his paw. Evan blinked. Then, mimicking Sonny's action, he placed his own palm against the dog's. Natalie didn't speak. She stood still, letting the moment unfold. Inside the house, Harper watched through the window, her gaze tracking the interaction. Her eyes widened, and her lips moved. No sound. Not yet. But something new. Expression. Emotion. Over the following days, Evan began visiting regularly. Always short visits, always quiet. Sometimes he would bring a toy. Sometimes a leaf or a pine cone to place by Sonny's feet, and Sonny would sit with him in the yard or by the porch steps. One day, Evan brought a book, Goodnight Moon, and though he didn't read it aloud, he opened it beside Sonny and turned the pages slowly, pointing to each illustration. Sonny followed his finger with a gentle gaze. Ryan installed a small wooden bench on the front porch. It became Evan's bench, unofficially. Some mornings, Natalie would find a small object left behind. A polished rock. A paperclip bent into a star. A folded note with no writing on it. One particularly bright afternoon, Claire brought Evan over for an indoor visit. She was hesitant at first, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her sweater, but Natalie welcomed them warmly. Evan walked straight to Harper's recliner. He didn't speak, didn't gesture. He simply sat cross-legged on the floor and placed the same rubber ball next to her foot. Sonny followed, lying between the two children like a bridge. Harper's eyes locked onto Evan's. Then her mouth opened. Another soft escaped. Evan looked at her, then down at the ball. With careful, deliberate motion, he rolled it gently toward her. It stopped against her toes. Harper's hand twitched. Claire gasped softly behind Natalie. It wasn't just progress. It was interaction. Later that evening, after Evan had gone home and Harper was asleep, Claire sat at Natalie's kitchen table, sipping mint tea. "Thank you," she said. "Evan hasn't connected with anyone like this. Ever. Not even at school." Natalie smiled, exhausted but glowing. "I think they're learning from each other." "And Sonny?" Natalie glanced toward the living room, where Sonny lay curled by Harper's chair. "He's doing more than I ever thought possible." Outside, the stars bloomed over Blue Haven like lanterns slowly being lit one by one. And inside two homes across the street from one another, two children, one who didn't move and one who didn't speak, were beginning to find a language all their own with the help of one golden-furred translator. The evening settled over Blue Haven like a quiet hymn. The coastal wind had softened, brushing against rooftops and sliding through pine branches without urgency. For the first time all week, the sky was clear, stars scattered above like cold embers, and the ocean below rolled in and out with its endless hush. Inside the Quinn home, all seemed calm until the silence shattered. Natalie was rinsing a baby bottle in the kitchen sink, her eyes drooping with exhaustion, when she heard it, a sharp, urgent sound from the living room. Not a bark, not a whimper, a howl. Just one. High, short, panicked. Sunny had never howled before. She dropped the bottle, water splashing across her sweater, and ran. There, beside the window, Harper lay reclined in her chair, her lips parted, face flushed red. The milk had backed up. She was choking. Quietly, terrifyingly. Sunny stood beside her, tail stiff, ears flat, eyes wide. Natalie rushed in, unbuckled Harper's straps, and lifted her daughter swiftly, turning her sideways across her arm. "Come on, baby. Come on." She patted Harper's back, coaxing breath back into her body with quiet desperation. A wet cough. Then another. Then a thin, trembling cry. Ryan burst in, panic on his face. "What happened?" "She choked," Natalie gasped. "And Sonny, he knew. He called me." Sonny lowered his head beside Harper and let out a soft whine, nudging her hand with his nose. That night, after Harper had calmed and been safely tucked into her crib, Natalie knelt beside Sonny in the living room. "You saved her?" she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved our baby." The next morning, the story began to ripple outward, not through headlines or social media, but neighbor to neighbor, whisper to whisper. Claire Linwood, who had just stepped out to check her mailbox, saw Natalie in the front yard and came over immediately. Natalie, still pale and processing, shared what happened in a hushed voice. "He howled," Natalie said. "Just once. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't." Claire was silent for a moment. Then she smiled faintly. "You should talk to Marla. She'll know what to do with this." By late afternoon, Marla Green was seated at Natalie's kitchen table, her wool cardigan folded neatly over the back of her chair. She listened carefully, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug of peppermint tea. When Natalie finished, Marla leaned back and exhaled. "I've seen dogs recognize seizures, panic attacks, even infections," she said. "But this, Sonny responding to choking, that's something different, something worth sharing." That evening, with Harper napping and Ryan strumming gently on his guitar in the corner, Natalie set up the family camera. She recorded an entry in their therapy log, not rehearsed, not polished, just truth. "Sonny saved Harper last night," she began. "He alerted me before I even knew anything was wrong. And then, he made her laugh." Yes, that too had happened, only hours after the choking scare, when Natalie had calmed and Harper had been gently reclined again. Sonny had returned to her side. He picked up a new toy, an odd little plush moon with blinking lights and a gentle jingle sound. Ryan had brought it home as a surprise earlier that week. Sonny pushed the toy with his nose. It spun slowly. The lights blinked in soft rhythm. Then Sonny did something unexpected. He began walking in slow, exaggerated circles around the toy, tail bobbing, head tilted just enough to seem comedic. Natalie watched in disbelief. Harper laughed, a soft, breathy laugh. Not long, but real, a giggle that filled the room like birdsong at dawn. Natalie dropped to her knees, crying and laughing at once. It had been more than 7 months since she'd heard that sound. The next morning, Lucille Whitaker, the retired choir teacher who lived 2 doors down, arrived with a tin of shortbread cookies and watery eyes. "I heard," she said simply, "from Evan." Evan had seen everything from his porch. The emergency, the recovery, the joy. And he'd told Claire one word: safe. Lucille sat for tea, her voice catching only once. "I taught music for 30 years, but there's nothing quite like the sound of a child's first laugh." Inspired by the moment, Lucille offered something unexpected. "What if I helped? Music therapy, informal. I could bring over small instruments, simple rhythms, things Harper can feel, not just hear." Natalie blinked, then smiled. "We'd love that." Over the next few days, Lucille began stopping by in the afternoons with hand drums, bells, and even a ukulele. Sunny would lie beside Harper as Lucille tapped slow, deliberate rhythms. Sometimes, Harper's eyes would widen. Other times, her lips would twitch in curiosity. Sunny seemed to sense the beats too, his tail thumping gently in time. Even neighbors who had kept their distance began to drift closer. Tom and Elise Wallace, an older couple with a fondness for crossword puzzles and cardinals, came by with a small bird feeder and offered to hang it outside Harper's window. "She likes watching things, doesn't she?" Elise said. Natalie nodded. "She sees everything." One evening, while Ryan adjusted the crib height and Natalie organized therapy notes, Sunny lay with Harper on her mat. Harper had begun cooing softly again, little vowel sounds that weren't quite words but were more than silence. Ryan watched from the hallway. "She's changing," he whispered. "She's returning," Natalie replied. That night, as the sea whispered to the cliffs beyond, Natalie stood on the porch with Harper wrapped in a soft knit blanket. The stars blinked above, clear and watchful. Sunny sat at her feet, calm and alert. Harper let out a small hum, not loud, not dramatic, but content. And Natalie smiled, not out of relief but something deeper, recognition. The town of Blue Haven was stirring earlier than usual on that Thursday morning, awakened not by the gulls or the surf, but by the rustling of newspapers. By 7 a.m., a dozen doorsteps carried the same front-page headline printed above the fold of the Blue Haven Courier. "Golden Retriever saves baby. Teaches her to laugh again." The photo beneath was grainy but warm, Sunny sitting beside Harper in her recliner, her tiny hand resting on his paw, her mouth slightly open in what could only be described as the hint of a smile. Natalie hadn't expected the story to run so quickly. She'd spoken with a reporter, yes, a gentle, spectacled woman named Bethany Mallard, in her 50s, known for her thoughtful profiles and habit of scribbling quotes into a tattered leather notebook. But she hadn't realized Bethany was going to lead with it. Natalie read the article at the kitchen table, Harper dozing nearby, Sunny curled at her feet. The writing was tender, factual, and surprisingly poetic. It spoke of therapy, of motherhood, of the quiet language between a child and her dog. Ryan came in from the workshop with coffee in hand, saw the paper, and blinked twice before sitting down beside her. "They put it on the front page," he said. Natalie didn't speak, but he could see the flush rising in her cheeks, the tremble in her fingers as she traced the printed photo. "We never asked for attention." "No," he agreed, "but maybe it's what someone else needs." By midday, the phone started ringing. First it was Claire, calling with teary congratulations. Then Lucille stopped by, paper in hand, beaming like she'd won the lottery. Even Evan, standing on his porch across the street, lifted the paper high and pointed at the picture, grinning without a word. Then came the email. It arrived in Natalie's inbox shortly after lunch from a Dr. Miriam Callahan, Director of Pediatric Rehabilitation at the Portland Neurotherapy Institute, a well-respected facility known for its experimental programs combining physical therapy with animal-assisted approaches. The message was direct but warm. "Dear Mrs. Quinn, I read about your daughter Harper and her dog Sunny in this morning's Courier. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. What I read, and the footage available on your public video log, deeply moved our team. We've been researching early-stage neuroplastic responses in paralyzed infants for several years, but have not seen such promising behavioral responsiveness from passive states outside of conventional medical intervention, especially not triggered by an animal. We would be honored to invite your family to participate in our 6-month pilot study. We provide housing, full-time therapy, and integration for certified therapy animals. We believe Sunny would thrive here. Please let us know if you would consider a visit. Warmly, Dr. Miriam Callahan." Natalie read the email 3 times before showing Ryan. Dr. Callahan's name wasn't unknown to them. She had co-authored several of the studies that Marla had printed and highlighted, tucked in the growing binder of Hope Research that Natalie kept on the shelf above the fridge. They didn't say anything for a long time. Ryan sat across from her, mug half drained, staring out the window. Finally, he said, "This could change everything." "But what if it changes what's already working?" Natalie replied. That evening, Marla came over to talk them through it. She arrived as always, her gray hair tucked beneath her signature straw hat, her walking cane tapping lightly on the porch steps. "Portland's not far," she said as she sat, crossing one ankle over the other, "but it's still far enough to make you hesitate." She looked at Harper, lying on her playmat, eyes following Sunny's slow tail sweeps. "Sunny will adapt," Marla said gently. "What you have here is rare, but if this institute can help her build on it, you owe her the chance." Over the next few days, the Quinns weighed every angle: the logistics, the therapy structure, the toll of leaving their support network. Even Evan looked crestfallen when Claire explained that Harper and Sunny might be gone for a while, but when Natalie showed him a photo of the facility gardens, lush, peaceful, filled with sunlit windows, Evan pointed to it, then to Harper, then gave a thumbs up. They sent the reply on Sunday. 2 days later, the Institute confirmed their participation. Housing would be available by the end of the month. Harper would undergo a full neurological assessment, Sunny would receive certification clearance for therapeutic interaction, and Natalie and Ryan would have full access to the therapy team. That week, another letter arrived, this one handwritten. It came from a mother in Coos Bay who had read the article and seen the video. Her daughter, 3 years old, also paralyzed from birth, had stopped responding to traditional therapy. She wrote, "I watched your video with Harper and Sunny 10 times. I cried the first 3. The 4th time, my daughter smiled when Sunny spun around the toy. She hasn't smiled in weeks. Please, whatever you're doing, don't stop. We need to believe this is possible." Natalie folded the letter and placed it beside the binder on the shelf. She looked down at Harper, who was lightly cooing beside Sunny as he rested his head on her lap. "Yes," she whispered. "We're going." The city of Portland greeted the Quinn family with wide avenues, brisk air, and the steady hum of movement. Cars, trams, people in coats walking quickly with coffee cups and purpose. It was colder here than in Blue Haven. The clouds hung lower, the sunlight sharper. But Natalie noticed that the hospital grounds, nestled near a tree-lined neighborhood, were surprisingly quiet. The Portland Neurotherapy Institute didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like a school made of glass and gardens. The air smelled of eucalyptus and fresh linens. The Quinns were led to a 2-bedroom apartment unit on the campus grounds. Small, clean, with large windows that overlooked a courtyard of lavender and stone paths. Their case coordinator, Marianne Dorsey, met them there with a clipboard and a calm smile. Marianne was in her mid-40s, with chin-length blonde hair and tortoiseshell glasses. She wore a gray cardigan over scrubs and moved with a practiced warmth. "You'll find we follow a rhythm here," she said, gesturing to a schedule on the fridge. "Therapy in the morning, optional animal-assisted integration in the afternoon, observation and rest periods in between. We're flexible with Harper's energy. And we're excited about Sunny." Sunny, already settled near Harper's chair, lifted his head as if he understood his name being mentioned. Ryan smiled. "He's ready." So was Harper. From the first morning in therapy, she showed signs of recognition. The clinical space was outfitted with soft lighting, textured mats, and natural wood furnishings. No metal beds, no sterile whites. Her primary therapist, Dr. Eli Rosen, was a tall, wiry man in his early 50s with unruly salt and pepper curls and deep laugh lines. He'd worked in pediatric neurology for over 20 years and had a gentle, sing-song voice he used with all his patients. "She's alert," he said during Harper's first floor session, adjusting a sensory arch over her recliner. "And she's watching Sunny more than us." Sunny lay beside Harper during each session, sometimes placing a paw near her foot, other times nudging a toy just close enough for her to notice, but not touch. Harper responded, not with full movements yet, but with eye tracking, soft coos, longer stretches of breath. She followed him like he was the sun, and she a flower slowly turning toward it. The program's surprise came 4 days in, when Claire Linwood arrived with Evan. Claire had stayed behind in Blue Haven at first, uncertain if Evan would tolerate the disruption. But after seeing how Harper lit up in his presence, and how Evan, in turn, had begun initiating gestures, she contacted the Institute. They welcomed them with a private unit next door to the Quinns. Evan didn't speak as they entered the facility, but his eyes scanned everything, especially Sunny. When he finally saw Harper again, his shoulders dropped, and a small smile flickered across his face. Sunny trotted over, tail wagging low and slow. The reintegration was seamless. Evan joined Harper's sessions in the afternoons. He wouldn't touch the toys himself, but when Sunny brought them to Harper, Evan would mimic the motion. He began handing Sunny blocks, then clapping gently when Harper tried to reach. The therapists, noting this interaction, introduced a shared play routine. They called it echo sessions. It worked like this. Sunny would retrieve a toy, usually a fabric ring or musical plush, and deliver it to Evan. Evan would place it near Harper. Sunny would then nudge it closer. Harper would respond, eyes locking, hand twitching, sometimes even a brief vocalization. The cycle repeated, delicate and slow, but purposeful. Dr. Callahan, who oversaw the program, watched from behind observation glass. She was a slender woman in her early 60s, with short silver hair and a sharp, observant expression. She took notes constantly but smiled often when the trio, Harper, Evan, and Sunny, entered the room. "This is more than we anticipated," she said quietly one afternoon to Natalie. "We expected companion behavior. What we're seeing is synchronized motivation." By the end of the second week, Harper was lifting her right hand in response to Sunny's touch with more clarity. Evan was speaking single words, ball, go, her, in the right context, which he hadn't done in months. The therapy team began documenting every session with video and biometric tracking. Neural activity from Harper showed increased spikes in sensory engagement. Evan's speech therapist noted improvements tied directly to sessions involving Sunny. One evening, Natalie stood watching the three of them in the common area. Sunny lay between Harper's mat and Evan's cross-legged frame. Evan tapped a block softly, passed it to Sunny, who nosed it toward Harper. Harper reached, not far, but deliberately. When her fingers brushed the block, Evan clapped once, and Harper laughed. Not the unsure, breathy giggle from before, a real, chest-soft laugh. Ryan, filming from across the room, caught it. Later that night, he uploaded the clip to their video journal. Within a day, it had been shared over 20,000 times. The next week, a local news crew from Portland's public broadcasting station arrived. Their host, Amy Corbin, was a bright-eyed journalist in her 30s with a gentle interviewing style and a love for human interest stories. "I heard this was something people had to see to believe," she said as she set up her camera. Turns out, they were right. The segment aired 3 days later. The clip of Sunny nudging the block between two silent children, one unable to move, the other hesitant to speak, became a quiet viral sensation. The title read, "Two Children, One Dog, A New Kind of Language." The auditorium at the Portland Neurotherapy Institute was bathed in soft amber light that morning. Rows of chairs were filled with physicians, pediatric specialists, therapy coordinators, and representatives from 5 hospitals across the Pacific Northwest. There was a palpable stillness in the air, expectation, curiosity, maybe even quiet skepticism. On stage, a large rug had been rolled out, and surrounded by cameras, mats, and softly colored toys. In the center, Harper Quinn lay reclined, her golden hair combed neatly, her posture supported by soft cushions. Just beside her, as always, was Sunny. The golden retriever had matured noticeably in the past few weeks. He was now nearly 7 months old. Taller, stronger, but his temperament had only grown gentler. His golden coat shimmered under the auditorium lights, and his eyes remained fixed on Harper, alert and calm. He knew this wasn't a typical session. The energy in the room was different. Natalie stood nearby, arms crossed lightly, fighting nerves while watching the growing crowd. Ryan was beside her, holding the tablet that would stream Harper's biometrics to a nearby monitor. At the edge of the stage sat Dr. Miriam Callahan, her silver hair tucked behind one ear, her notebook already open. She gave Natalie a small nod of encouragement. The presentation had been planned as a demonstration of observed behavior, a non-committal phrase chosen to lower expectations. No one expected a milestone, least of all Natalie. But Sunny always knew more than anyone gave him credit for. It began the way every session began. Sunny placed a soft, rattle-filled plush just a few inches beyond Harper's reach. Harper blinked. The room was still. A few murmurs drifted from the audience, observers noting Harper's eye tracking and subtle vocalizations. Then Sunny touched her hand with his nose, just once, gently, a gesture so familiar that even the staff had begun calling it the nudge. And then Harper moved. It wasn't the trembling jerk of an accidental reflex, nor the hesitant twitch of nervous anticipation. Harper pushed with her arms, slowly, shakily, but with intent. Her spine curled, her neck strained, and her body leaned forward like a flower fighting through soil. With a small cry, she sat upright, unsupported, breathing hard, looking at Sunny. The room went silent for a beat, and then the reaction cracked like a thunderclap. Dr. Rosen leapt from his seat. Several therapists stood mid-note. Natalie dropped to her knees beside Harper, covering her mouth. Ryan's camera shook in his hands as he tried to steady the recording. Dr. Callahan's pen paused mid-air, and Sunny, calm, unwavering Sunny, did not move. He stayed seated beside Harper, tail sweeping slowly along the rug. He gave a small bark, as if to say, "There she is." When Harper wobbled slightly, he shifted just enough for her to rest her weight against his side. The moment was documented from every angle: heart rate, neural response, muscle tremor data. It didn't matter. What mattered was what everyone in the room had just seen with their own eyes. A child told she may never move had just sat up on her own, with the help of a dog. In the hours that followed, the Institute buzzed like a hive. Phones rang, emails flew. Dr. Callahan received 3 calls before lunch from hospitals in Seattle, Boise, and Sacramento, all interested in satellite partnerships. She was ready. She had known this day might come. When she sat down with the Quinns that evening, she didn't bring paperwork, just 3 mugs of chamomile tea and a simple proposal. "You go home," she said. "Back to Blue Haven. We'll come to you." She explained her vision, a micro-center for animal-assisted pediatric therapy, based in the Quinns' hometown. Portable modules, shared data systems, rotating therapy teams. Harper would continue as a primary case. Sunny would serve as a foundational companion dog. Marla Green, Dr. Callahan noted, had already agreed to be part of the community training network. Natalie stared at her tea, blinking rapidly. "You want to build a center around our daughter and our dog?" "I want to build it with them," Callahan corrected gently. Back in Blue Haven, preparations moved quickly. The old storefront next to the library was converted into a therapy room with wide windows and calming light. The town rallied around the project. Claire and Evan offered to help on weekends. Lucille donated instruments, and even the Wallace couple brought potted herbs to line the windowsills. Harper returned to the recliner by the front window of her home, but this time with new strength. She now sat upright for long stretches, especially when Sunny was near. Her speech hadn't arrived yet, but her laughter was frequent, and her hands often reached for more than just toys. They reached for people, for connection. Sunny, now the quiet heart of the new center, remained ever constant. He walked beside Harper through each new stage, rested beside her when she tired, and barked softly when she succeeded. Therapists from neighboring towns came to observe. Parents traveled for miles just to sit in the back of the room and watch. One child smiled for the first time in months after watching Harper reach for Sunny's ear. Another took his first steps in a room filled with other children, therapy dogs, and hope. The day the center officially opened, Harper fell asleep early. She lay curled on a padded mat in the therapy room, hand resting on Sunny's back, her face serene. Outside, the sign above the door now read, "The Sunny Room, Center for Connection and Hope." Natalie stood in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe. Ryan came up behind her and slipped an arm around her waist. "She's still changing," he said. Natalie nodded. "She's still returning." Sunny shifted slightly, just enough for Harper's fingers to slide into the fur at his neck. The lights dimmed, the night deepened, and Harper slept, with her hand resting on the very same light that had never left her side. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, on 4 paws, with a wagging tail, and eyes full of devotion. Harper's story is not just about therapy or science, but about the unseen grace that flows when love, faith, and patience walk hand in hand. What medicine could not promise, God delivered through a dog, an animal created not just for companionship, but for healing. In Sunny's gentle presence, we are reminded that heaven often speaks through humble messengers. Maybe you're facing something today that feels impossible. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign, for a breakthrough, for a touch of light in the dark. Let this story remind you, God still moves, and sometimes He moves through the soft nudge of a golden retriever at just the right moment. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and say, "Amen" if you believe that miracles still happen. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire faith and healing. May God bless every viewer watching this, and send a Sunny of your own when you need it most.